When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into the room to light the fire, and was kneeling on the hearthrug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments, and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all like it, and thought it curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with a tapestry that had a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of a deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land which seemed to have no trees on it, and to look rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out of the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there?" "Yes." "That's the moor. Does thou like it?" "No, I hate it." "That's because thou's not used to it. Thou thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it." "Do you?" "Aye, that I do. I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with growing things that smell sweet. It's fair lovely in spring and summer, when the gorse and broom and heather's in flower. It smells of honey, and there's a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and skylarks make such a noise, humming and singing. Hey, I wouldn't live away from moor for anything." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she was used to in India were not at all like this. They were obsequious and servile. They did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were their equals. They made salaams and called them protector of the poor and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her Ayah in the face when she was angry. She wondered a little what this girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured-looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap her back, if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. "You're a strange servant." "Aye, I know that. If there were a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I would never have been even one of the under-housemaids. I might have been let to the scullery maid, but I'd never have been let upstairs. I'm too common and I talk too much Yorkshire, but this is a funny house for all it's so grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress, except Mr. Pitcher and Mrs. Medlock. Mr. Craven, now, he won't be troubled about anything when he's here, and he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she could never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses. Are you going to be my servant?" Martha began to rub the grate again. "I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant, and she is Mr. Craven's. But I'm to do the housework up here and wait on you a bit, but you won't need much waiting on." "Who is going to dress me?" Martha sat back on her heels and stared. "Canna thou dress a son? What do you mean? I don't understand your language." "I forgot. Mrs. Medlock told me I'd have to be careful you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't they put on their own clothes?" "No, I never did in my life. My Ayah dressed me, of course." "Well, it's time thou should learn. Thou cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on this end for a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools, what with nurses and being washed and dressed and took out for a walk as if they were puppies. It is different in India." I can see it's different." "I dare say it's because there's a lot of them natives there. Do you know, when you arrived I thought you'd be an Indian native." "What? What? You thought I was a native? You are a daughter of a pig." "Well now, who are you calling names? You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. I've nothing against the Indians. When you read about 'em in tracts, they're always very religious." "You do not know anything about them. They are servants who must salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything." She was in such a rage and felt so hopeless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly alone and far away from everything she understood, and which understood her, but she threw herself face downwards on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. "Eh, you mustn't cry like that there. You mustn't, for sure. Yeah, I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything, just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Now do stop crying." There was something comforting, really rather friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way, that had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. "Hey, right, now it's time for you to get up. Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and tea and dinner things into the room next to this one. It's been made into a nursery for thee, and I'll help thee on with the clothes if I'll get out of bed. If the buttons are at the back, they cannot button them themselves." When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from a wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived that night before with Mrs. Medlock. "Those are not mine. Mine are black." She looked at the thick white wool coat and dress, and added, with cool approval, "Those are nicer than mine. These are the ones that must put on. Mr. Craven ordered Mrs. Medlock to get 'em in London. He said, 'I won't have a child dressed in black wandering about like a lost soul. It'd make the place even sadder than it is. Put colour on her.' Mother said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She don't hold with black herself. I hate black things." The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. "Why doesn't thou put on thy own shoes?" she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. "My ayah did it. It was the custom." She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they just gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom," and one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair, and button boots, and pick things up, and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic, who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters, who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves, and on the younger ones who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk. But Mary only listened to her coldly, and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all. There's 12 of us, and my father only gets 16 shillings a week. I can tell you my mother's put to it to manage porridge for 'em all. They tumble about the moor and play there all day, and mother says the air of the moor fattens 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass, same as the wild ponies do. Our Dickon, he's 12 years old. He's got a young pony he calls his own. Where did he get it? He found it on the moor with its mother when it was a little un. He began to make friends with it, and give it a bit of bread and things, and pluck young grass for it. It got to like him, so it follows him about, and it lets him get on its back. Dickon's a kind lad. Animals like him. Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own. She always thought she'd like to, so she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, and as she had never been interested in anyone but herself, it was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into the nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy old pictures on the wall and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the centre was set with a good substantial breakfast. But she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it." That doesn't want that porridge. No, that doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it or a bit of sugar. I don't want it. I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes. Why? Why? Because they scarce ever have their stomachs full in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes. Don't know what it is to be hungry, said Mary with the indifference of ignorance. Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough. I have no patience if folks as just sits and stares at good bread and meat. My word, I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em were here, to put all that under their pinafores. Why don't you take it to them? It's not mine, and this isn't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for mother to give her a day's rest. Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. You wrap up warm and run out and play, you. It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat. Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? Well, if thou doesn't go out, thou'll stay in, and what has thou got to do? There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? You'll go by yourself. You'll have to learn to play like other children does that haven't got brothers and sisters. Our Dickon goes off on the moor by himself and he plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's got sheep on the moor that knows him, and birds that comes and eats out of his hand. However little there is to eat, he always saves a bit of his bread to coax his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon that made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. There would be birds outside, though there would not be ponies or sheep, and they would be different from the birds in India. It might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her the way downstairs. If it goes round that way, they'll come to the gardens. There's lots of flowers in summer-time, but there's nothing blooming now. One of the gardens is locked up. No one's been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary, in spite of herself. Here was another locked door to be added to the 100 in the strange house. Martha looked hesitant, as though she'd said too much already. But she went on. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. Oh, there's Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing. I must run. After she had gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door in the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the garden which no one had been to for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like, and whether there were any flowers still alive in it. When she had passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in the great gardens, with wide lawns and winding walks with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old grey fountain in the midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk into a garden. She was just thinking this when she saw that at the end of the path she was following there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. She was not familiar enough with England to know that she was coming upon the kitchen gardens, where the vegetables and fruit were growing. She went towards the wall and found there was a green door in the ivy, and that it stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found that it was a garden with walls all around it, and it was only one of several walled gardens that seemed to open into one another. She saw another open green door, revealing bushes and pathways between beds containing winter vegetables. Fruit trees were trained flat against the wall, and over some of the beds there were glass frames. The place was bare and ugly enough, Mary thought, as she stood and stared about her. It might be nicer in summer when things were green, but there was nothing pretty about it now. Presently an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door leading from the second garden. He looked startled when he saw Mary, and then touched his cap. He had a surly old face, and did not seem at all pleased to see her. But then she was displeased with his garden, and wore her quite contrary expression, and certainly did not seem at all pleased to see him. "What is this place?"
one of the kitchen gardens."
"What is that?" she said, pointing towards another green door.
"Another of 'em. There's another and another and another side of wall, and then there's the orchard to the side of that."
"Can I go in them?"
"If thou likes. There's naught to see."
Mary made no response. She went down the path and through the second green door. There she found more walls and winter vegetables and glass frames, but in the second wall there was another green door, and it was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden, which no one had seen for 10 years. As she was not at all a timid child, and always did what she wanted to do, Mary went over to a green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open, because she wanted to be sure that she had found the mysterious garden. But it did open quite easily, and she walked through it, and found herself in an orchard. There were walls all around it also, and trees trained against them, and there were bare fruit trees growing in the winter-brown grass. But there was no green door to be seen anywhere. Mary looked for it, and yet when she had entered the upper end of the garden she had noticed that the wall did not seem to end with the orchard, but to extend beyond it, as if it enclosed a place on the other side. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them, and suddenly he burst into his winter song, almost as if it had caught sight of her and was calling to her. She stopped and listened to him, and somehow his cheerful, friendly little whistle gave her a pleased feeling. Even a disagreeable little girl may be lonely, and the big closed house and big bare moor and big bare gardens had made her feel as if there were no one left in the world but herself. If she had been an affectionate child, who had been used to being loved, she would have broken her heart. But even though she was Mistress Mary quite contrary, she was desolate, and the bright-breasted little bird brought a look into her sour little face, which was almost a smile. She listened to him until he flew away. He was not like an Indian bird, and she liked him, and wondered if she should ever see him again. Perhaps he lived in the mysterious garden, and knew all about it. Perhaps it was because she had nothing whatever to do that she thought so much about the deserted garden. She was curious about it, and wanted to see what it was like. Why had Mr. Archibald Craven buried the key? If he had liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? She wondered if she should ever see him, but she knew that if she did, she should not like him, and he would not like her, and that she should only stand and stare at him and say nothing, though she would be wanting dreadfully to ask him why he had done such a queer thing. People never like me, and I never like people, and I never can talk as the Crawford children could. They were always talking and laughing and making noises. She thought of the robin, and of the way he seemed to sing his song at her, and she remembered the tree-top he perched on. She stopped rather suddenly on the path. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. I feel sure it was. There was a wall round the place, and there was no door. She walked back into the first kitchen garden she had entered, and found the old man digging there. She went and stood beside him and watched him a few moments in her cold little way. He took no notice of her, and so at last she spoke to him. I've been into the other gardens.
Well, there was nothing to prevent thee.
I went into the orchard.
There was no dog at the door to bite thee.
There was no door there into the other garden.
What garden?
He stopped his digging for a moment. The one on the other side of the wall. There were trees there. I saw the tops of them. A bird with a red breast was sitting on one of them. He sang. To her surprise, the surly old weather-beaten face actually changed its expression. A slow smile spread over it, and the gardener looked quite different. It made her think that it was curious how much nicer a person looked when he smiled. She had not thought of this before. He turned about to the orchard side of his garden and began to whistle, a low, soft whistle. She could not understand how such a surly man could make such a coaxing sound. After the next moment a wonderful thing happened. She heard a soft little rushing flight through the air, and it was the bird with the red breast flying to them, and he actually alighted on the big clod of earth quite near to the gardener's foot.
Here he is. Where's thou been, eh, thou cheeky little beggar? I've not seen thee before today. Hast thou begun the courting this early at the season? Thou's too forward.
The bird put his tiny head on one side and looked up at him with his soft bright eye, which was like a black dewdrop. He seemed quite familiar and not the least afraid. He hopped about and pecked the earth briskly, looking for seeds and insects. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart, because he was so pretty and cheerful and seemed so like a person. He had a tiny plump body and a delicate beak and slender delicate legs. Will he always come when you call him?
Aye, that he will. I've knowed him since he was a fledgling. He came out of the nest in the other garden, and when first he flew over the wall he was too weak to fly back. And so for a few days we got friendly. When he went over the wall again, the rest of the brood was gone, and he was lonely. So he came back to me.
What kind of bird is he?
Doesn't thou know? He's a robin redbreast, and they're the friendliest, curiousest birds alive. They're almost as friendly as dogs, if you know how to get on with them. Here, watch him pecking there, looking at us now and again. He knows we're talking about him.
It was the queerest thing in the world to see the old fellow. He looked at the plump little scarlet waistcoated bird as if he were both proud and fond of him.
He's a conceited one, though. He likes to hear folk talk about him. I'm curious, bless me, there never was his like for curiosity and meddling. He's always coming to see what I'm planting. He knows all the things Mr. Craven never troubles hisself to find out. He's the head gardener, he is.
The robin hopped about busily pecking the soil, and now and then stopped and looked at them a little. Mary thought his black dewdrop eyes gazed at her with great curiosity. It really seemed as if he were finding out all about her. The queer feeling in her heart increased. Where did the rest of the brood fly to?
Oh, there's no knowing. The old ones turn 'em out of their nest and make 'em fly, and they're scattered before you know it. This one was a knowing one, and he knew he was lonely.
Mistress Mary went a step nearer to the robin and looked at him very hard. I'm lonely. She had not known before that this was one of the things that made her feel sour and cross. She seemed to find it out when the robin looked at her, and she looked at the robin. The gardener pushed his cap back on his bald head.
Art thou the little wench from India?
Yes.
Then no wonder thou's lonely. Thou'lt be lonelier before thou's done.
He began to dig again, driving his spade deep into the rich black garden soil, while the robin hopped about, very busily employed. What is your name?
Ben Weatherstaff. I'm lonely myself, except when he's with me. He's the only friend I've got.
I have no friends at all. I never had. My ayah didn't like me, and I never played with anyone. It is a Yorkshire habit to say what you think with blunt frankness, and old Ben Weatherstaff was a Yorkshire moorman.
Then thee and me are alike. We was wove out of the same cloth. We're neither of us good-looking, and we're both of us as sour as we look. We've got the same nasty tempers, both of us, I'll warrant.
This was plain speaking, and Mary Lennox had never heard the truth about herself in her life. Native servants always salaamed and submitted to you, whatever you did. She had never thought much about her looks, but she wondered if she was as unattractive as Ben Weatherstaff, and also she wondered if she looked as sour as he had before the robin came. She actually began to wonder also if she was nasty-tempered. She felt uncomfortable. Suddenly a clear, rippling little sound broke out near her, and she turned round. She was standing a few feet from a young apple tree, and the robin had flown onto one of its branches and had burst out into a scrap of song. What did he do that for?
He's made up his mind to make friends with thee. Dang me if he hasn't took a fancy to thee.
To me? Said Mary, and moved towards the little tree softly, and looked up. Would you make friends with me? Would you? She did not say it either in her hard little voice, or in her imperious Indian voice, but in a tone so soft and eager and coaxing, Ben Weatherstaff was as surprised as she had been when she heard him whistle. Why, thou said that as nice and human as if thou was a real child, instead of a sharp old woman.
I said it almost like Dickon talks to his wild things on the moor.
Do you know Dickon?
Everybody knows him. Dickon's wandering about everywhere. The very blackberries and heatherbells knows him. I'll warrant foxes shows him where their cubs are, and skylarks don't hide their nests from him.
Mary would have liked to ask more questions. She was almost as curious about Dickon as she was about the deserted garden. But just at that moment the robin, who had ended his song, gave a little shake of his wings, spread them, and flew away. He had made his visit, and had other things to do. He has flown over the wall. He's flown into the orchard. He's flown across the other wall, into the garden where there's no door.
He lives there. He came out of the egg there. If he's courting, he's making up to some young madam of a robin that lives among the old rose trees there.
Rose trees? Are there rose trees? Ben Weatherstaff took up his spade again and began to dig.
There were 10 years ago.
I should like to see them. Where is the green door? There must be a door somewhere. Ben drove his spade deep and looked as uncompanionable as he had when she had first seen him.
It were 10 years ago. It isn't there now.
No door? There must be.
None as anyone can find, and none as anyone's business to look for. Don't be a meddlesome wench and poke your nose where it's no cause to go. I must get on with my work. Get you gone and play, you. I've no more time.
And he actually stopped digging, threw his spade over his shoulder, and walked off, without even glancing at her or saying good-bye. At first, each day which passed by for Mary Lennox was exactly like the others. Every morning she awoke in her tapestried room and found Martha kneeling upon the hearth building her fire. Every morning she ate her breakfast in the nursery, which had nothing amusing in it, and after each breakfast she gazed out of the window across the huge moor, which seemed to spread out on all sides and climb up to the sky, and after she had stared for a while she realized that if she did not go out she would have to stay in and do nothing. And so she went out. She did not know that this was the best thing she could have done, and she did not know that when she began to walk quickly or even run along the paths and down the avenue, she was stirring her slow blood and making herself stronger by fighting with the wind which swept down from the moor. She ran only to make herself warm, and she hated the wind which rushed at her face and roared and held her back as if it were some giant she could not see. But the big breaths of rough, fresh air blown over the heather filled her lungs with something which was good for her whole thin body, and whipped some red colour into her cheeks, and brightened her dull eyes, when she did not know anything about it. But after a few days, spent almost entirely out of doors, she wakened one morning, knowing what it was to be hungry, and when she sat down to her breakfast, she did not glance disdainfully at her porridge and push it away, but took up her spoon and began to eat it, and went on eating it until her bowl was empty.
I got on well enough with that this morning, didn't there?
It tastes nice today, said Mary, feeling a little surprised herself.
It's the air of the moor that's given this stomach for the victuals. It's lucky for thee that there's got victuals as well as an appetite. There's been 12 in our cottage as has had the stomach and nothing to put in it. You go playing you out of doors every day and you'll get some flesh on your bones, and you won't be so yaller.
I don't play. I have nothing to play with.
Nothing to play with.
Our children plays with sticks and stones. They just runs about and shouts and looks at things.
Mary did not shout, but she looked at things. There was nothing else to do. She walked round and round the gardens and wandered about the paths in the park. Sometimes she looked for Ben Weatherstaff, but though several times she saw him at work, he was too busy to look at her or was too surly. Once, when she was walking towards him, he picked up his spade and turned away, as if he did it on purpose. One place she went to oftener than any other. It was the long walk outside the gardens with the wall round them. There were bare blue flower beds on either side of it, and against the walls ivy grew thickly. There was one part of the wall where the creeping dark green leaves were more bushy than elsewhere. It seemed as if for a long time that part had been neglected. The rest of it had been clipped and made to look neat, but at this lower end of the walk it had not been trimmed at all. A few days after she had talked to Ben Weatherstaff, Mary stopped to notice this and wonder why it was so. She had just paused and was looking up at the long spray of ivy swinging in the wind, when she saw a gleam of scarlet and heard a brilliant chirp, and there, on top of a wall, perched Ben Weatherstaff's Robin Redbreast, tilting forward to look at her, with his small head on one side. "Oh, is it you? Is it you?" It did not seem at all queer to her that she had spoken to him, as though she was sure that he would understand and answer her. He did answer. He twittered and chirped and hopped along the wall, as if he were telling her all sorts of things. It seemed to Mistress Mary as if she understood him too, though he was not speaking in words. It was as if he said, "Good morning. Isn't the wind nice? Isn't the sun nice? Isn't everything nice? Let us both chirp and hop and twitter. Come on, come on." Mary began to laugh, and as he hopped and took little flights along the wall, she ran with him. Poor little thin, sallow, ugly Mary. She actually looked more pretty for a moment. "I like you, I like you," she cried out, pattering down the walk, and she chirped and tried to whistle, which last she did not know how to do in the least. But the robin seemed to be quite satisfied, and chirped and whistled back at her. At last he spread his wings and made a darting flight to the top of a tree, where he perched and sang loudly. That reminded Mary of the first time that she had seen him. He'd been swinging on a tree-top then, and she had been standing in the orchard. Now she was on the other side of the orchard and standing in the path outside a wall, much lower down, and there was the same tree inside. "It's the garden no one can get into. It's the garden without a door. He lives in there. How I wish I could see what it's like." She ran up the walk to the green door she had entered the first morning. Then she ran down the path through the other door, and then into the orchard. And when she stood and looked up, there was the tree on the other side of the wall, and there was the robin just finishing his song and beginning to preen his feathers with his beak. "It is the garden, I'm sure it is." She walked round and looked closely at the side of the orchard wall, but she only found what she had found before. There was no door in it. Then she ran through the kitchen gardens again and out into the walk outside the long ivy-covered wall, and she walked to the end of it and looked at it, but there was no door. And then she walked to the other end, looking again, but there was no door. "It's very queer. Ben Weatherstaff said there was no door, and there is no door, but there must have been one 10 years ago, because Mr. Craven buried the key." This gave her so much to think of that she began to be quite interested and feel that she was not sorry that she had come to Misselthwaite Manor. In India she had always felt hot and too languid to care much about anything. The fact was that the fresh wind from the moor had begun to blow the cobwebs out of her young brain and to waken her up a little. She stayed out of doors nearly all day, and when she sat down to her supper at night she felt hungry and drowsy and comfortable. She did not feel cross when Martha chattered away, and at last she thought she would ask her a question. She asked it after she had just finished her supper and had sat down on the hearth-rug before the fire. Why did Mr. Craven hate the garden? She had made Martha stay with her, and Martha had not objected at all. She was very young and used to a crowded cottage full of brothers and sisters, and she found it dull in the great servants' hall downstairs, where the footman and under-housemaids made fun of her Yorkshire speech and looked upon her as a common little thing and sat and whispered among themselves. Martha liked to talk, and the strange child who had lived in India and had been waited upon by the natives was novelty enough to attract her. She sat down on the hearth herself without waiting to be asked. "Art thou thinking about that garden yet?" "I knew thou would. That was just the same with me when I first heard about it." "Why did he hate it?" "Listen to the wind wuthering around the house. You could bear stand up on the moor tonight if you were out in it." Mary did not know what wuthering meant until she listened, and then she understood. It must mean that hollow, shuddering sort of roar which rushed round and round the house, as if the giant no one could see were buffeting it and beating at the walls and windows to try to break in. But one knew he could not get in, and somehow it made one feel very safe and warm inside a room with a red coal fire. But why did he hate it so? Mrs. Medlock said it's not to be talked about. But there's lots of things in this place that's not to be talked about. And that's Mr. Craven's orders. His troubles are none of the servants' business, he says, but for that garden he wouldn't be like he is. It was Mrs. Craven's garden that she made when they were first married, and she just loved it. And they used to tend the flowers themselves, and none of the gardeners was ever let to go in. Him and her used to go in and shut the door and stay there for hours, reading and talking. And she was just a bit of a girl, and there was an old tree with a branch bent like a seat on it, and she made roses grow over it, and she used to sit there. But one day when she was sitting there, the branch broke, and she fell on the ground, and was hurt so bad that next day she died. The doctors thought he'd go out of his mind and die too. Well, that's why he hates it. No one's never gone in again, and he won't let anyone talk about it. Mary did not ask any more questions. She looked at the fire and listened to the wind wuthering. It seemed to be wuthering louder than ever. At that moment, a very good thing was happening to her. 4 good things had happened to her, in fact, since she came to Misselthwaite Manor. She had felt as if she had understood a robin, and that he had understood her. She had run in the wind until her blood had grown warm. She had been healthily hungry for the first time in her life. And she had found out what it was to be sorry for someone. She was getting on. But as she was listening to the wind, she began to listen to something else. She did not know what it was, because at first she could scarcely distinguish it from the wind itself. It was a curious sound. It seemed almost as if a child were crying somewhere. Sometimes the wind sounded rather like a child crying. But presently Mistress Mary felt quite sure that the sound was inside the house, not outside it. It was far away, but it was inside. She turned round and looked at Martha. "Do you hear anyone crying?" Martha suddenly looked confused. "No, that's the wind. Sometimes it sounds as if someone were lost on the moor and wailing. Oh, it's got all sorts of sounds. But listen, it's in the house, down one of those long corridors." And at that moment a door must have opened somewhere downstairs, for a great rushing draught blew along the passage, and the door of the room they sat in was blown open with a crash, and they both jumped to their feet. The light was blown out, and the crying sound was swept down the far corridor, so that it was to be heard more plainly than ever. "There! I told you so! It is someone crying, and it isn't a grown-up person." Martha ran and shut the door and turned the key, but before she did it they both heard the sound of a door in some far passage shutting with a bang, and then everything was quiet, for even the wind ceased wuthering for a few minutes. It was the wind, and if it wasn't, it was little Betty Butterworth, the scullery maid. "She's had the toothache all day." But something troubled and awkward in her manner made Mistress Mary stare very hard at her. She did not believe she was speaking the truth.